Hi everyone, welcome to my presentation. So today I'll be talking on the leadership and team performance final presentation, where throughout this course I've been writing on improving communication and discharge readiness through structured nurse to nurse follow-up where I work. So that is what my presentation will be. So this project was conducted in a clinical nursing environment and was developed to connect leadership theory with real workplace practices. So the presentation summarizes the project description, leadership approaches used, team behaviors observed, project outcomes, leadership actions, and how I approach the problem differently in the future. So here we look at the background, like what I said, we'll be looking at clinical communication effects, discharge readiness, how clinical communication affects discharge readiness. Discharge delays often involve unclear follow-up. We'll look at that. We'll also look at nurse-to-nurse communication support coordination. Um, The project will also focus on teamwork, accountability, and self-care. So let's look at the project title. Like I said before, is on improving communication and discharge readiness through structured nurse-to-nurse follow-up. And the purpose is to improve communication, teamwork, discharge readiness, and professional growth through brief structured follow-up and reflection. So let's look at the project goals and measures of success. So the goals will be to identify common communication barriers, encourage teamwork and shared responsibility, support safe and timely patient care, strengthen leadership growth, and the success measures will be project completion, team participation, identified barriers, leadership growth. So throughout we look at leadership framework that I used. It was a course concept that was applied. So what were the course concept? I applied team leadership, shared leadership, leadership member exchange, situational leadership, ethical leadership, change leadership. What this means is we know that several leadership concepts from the course was used in the project. It guided the project. When we look at leadership member exchange, we also look at the relevance that it has to do with team members. And the team members were willing to participate when communication was respectful and trust-based. When we look at situational leadership, we saw that it helped me to adjust approach based on workload, staff readiness, and team response. So I applied the ethical leadership in a way that um, the project required a non-punitive approach that was focused on improvement rather than blame. So that was the ethical aspect of it. Let's look at leadership styles employed. I employed collaborative leadership, shared leadership, coaching style, situational leadership, servant-oriented approach. And why was that done? It was done to build trust, invite input, and reduce resistance amongst the participants. Let's look at the decision modes that I took and the leadership actions. The modes were consultative, participative, development focused, and the leadership actions were I asked open-ended questions, encourage feedback, focus on repeated patterns. I avoided blames and used brief follow-up. So what this means is on the consultative and participative decision approach, I did not impose a solution on the team members. Instead, I asked open-ended questions and invited team members to identify communication barriers and suggest practical improvements. I also used a development focused approach because the purpose was to strengthen team learning and leadership growth. This reflected the idea that leaders must consider the situation, followers, and organizational context before deciding how to act. So let's look at week 5. At week 5, where the project itself started on the field, we observed we observed that some staff were open and cooperative, others were reserved, workload affected participation, and staff responded better to brief, respectful conversations. So it was at week 5 that I actually started applying leadership behaviors in the clinical setting. Like I said, some team members were open and willing to participate, especially when the discussion focused on practical issues such as discharge delays, incomplete communication, and clearer follow-up. Other staff members were more reserved, possibly because of workload, uncertainty, and concern that communication problems could be interpreted as personal failure. This shows me that psychological safety is important when asking staff to speak honestly about team barriers. Let's look at week 6, the findings. There was progress. We observed some progress. The team became more familiar with the project, and there was engagement. There was improvement in engagement, and communication barriers became clearer. The mentor advised keeping the process simple and the patient-centered. That was what we found in week 6. Let's see in week 7, which was the final active phase. So there was repeated communication patterns identified, team issues were properly clarified, mentor feedback reviewed, findings prepared for final presentation, which is today. And the key insight that were discovered for week 7 was that communication improvement requires both structure and culture. Very important. Let's look at team members' behavior observed. There were positive behaviors throughout the project and reserved behaviors, like I mentioned before. The positive behaviors were that amongst team members, there was cooperation, initiative, feedback sharing, willingness to support each other and to improve amongst ourselves. And the reserved behaviors were that some members were silent, they were timid with limited participation, which is normal, and caution when discussing barriers. So we took proper caution and note concerning that. So we look at team issues that were identified. The main team issue were time pressure, competitive clinical priorities, inconsistent follow-up on even engagement, interdisciplinary communication barriers, hesitation to speak up. These were what we identified, and discharge readiness, we discovered that discharge readiness depends on more than nurses alone. It also involves physician, case management, pharmacy, all the other team members, the family. So Some team members were questioned when discussing communication gaps because they did not want their comments to be viewed as criticisms. So, as we can see, research shows that healthcare professionals may hesitate to speak up because of hierarchical fear and of the unknown consequences. Let's look at the project outcome. Um, there were more open discussion of communication barriers. There was improved awareness of discharge readiness needs. At the end, we're also able to find there was stronger focus on process involvement, increased leadership confidence, and clearer understanding of team dynamics. So, leadership action I would do differently, like future improvement. I would say you start with clearer baseline data. When you're communicating about discharge or talking with team members, involve interdisciplinary partners earlier. Those who are involved in the discharge process, they should start carrying out the activity, the case management, arranging uh, medication discharge from the pharmacy. Use a simple written checklist sooner that will help your understanding between the patient and family. Schedule brief feedback moments. Collect more structured team feedback. This will help in the process. So let's look at leadership growth and professional application. I will incorporate in the future stronger communication, advice for better active listening, improved emotional intelligence, greater adaptability, more confidence leading without authority, deeper appreciation for shared leadership. So we look at how does the project and everything connect with the course. It's very, very important. Um, we see that from the course learning, what was applied into the field was we saw that leadership as influence is connected from what we learn in class to what we observe throughout this project. We also saw teams require trust and coordination. Shared leadership improves accountability. Ethical leadership avoids blame. Change requires communication and buy-in. So this, from what we learn in the course to what we gathered on the field, that is the connection. And the conclusion is that the key conclusion point, structured communication improves team awareness, but sustainable improvement requires trust, shared responsibility, and psychological safety. The final message is effectiveness leadership is practical, ethical, collaborative, and patient centered. Thank you so much for listening. And that is the end of my presentation.